Hey everybody, this is a film about how French technology was recovered from the Roswell crash site. Hang on a minute. So I've written this 6-page script all about it. And you know what? I'm not going to do it. Because it's very much trust me, bro. Even although I personally have done the research, I've got no reason to lie, but I think you actually deserve not just me telling you about the Roswell crash, but actually you need me to provide evidence, interviews, and documentation to support what I have researched. So today, it's just going to be an introduction. You can get the film with other people later on. I'll probably do 2 or 3 films about this because it's so interesting. So let me tell you the basic idea. Something crashed near Roswell in 1947. We all know this. And I was talking to my friend Joshua Bertrand about military missions at the time, and he was saying that I should really look at a Project Mogul. Well, Project Mogul, of course, is the thing that you don't want me to talk about, because if you are a member of the paid up UFO Believers Club, you believe that the US Air Force was truthful in saying that a UFO crashed near Roswell and then used Project Mogul as a cover story to distract us from the truth of the flying saucer. But in fact, it might be the other way around, that the US Air Force leaked a flying saucer story to cover up the very secret Project Mogul. So I'm not going to talk about that issue. What I'm going to do is actually look at Project Mogul and see if there's any clues in Project Mogul which might actually help understand what could have crashed. Now, of course, it might have been a flying saucer, or it might have been Project Mogul. And I think it's very important that I share all the facts with you really straight. What happened was Joshua Bertrand, who's a great mate and has done all this research into buoyant craft and aerogels, said to me that I should read the now declassified Project Mogul documentation, which he sent to me. And in it, I found something very interesting. In it was all the details of what Project Mogul really did. Now, I assume Project Mogul was a spy balloon which floated over the Soviet Union and took pictures. None of that is true. None of it. You have to really reassess what Project Mogul actually was. First of all, let's get rid of the whole balloon word. Sure, it was a buoyant craft. It was even called a balloon. But the balloon was just a buoyant bag made by the General Mills Cheerio cereal company in Minnesota, a plastic bag full of hydrogen that was designed to inflate at about 60,000 feet. Now, the idea behind it is very clever. In 1936, a Japanese engineer or weatherman had discovered something called a jet stream, and he discovered that there was a high-speed band of wind which goes from west to east in the northern hemisphere, and the Japanese used it to send paper balloons over the Pacific as incendiary devices to set the Californian and Oregon forests on fire in World War II. The balloons arrived, but the fires didn't happen, thank God. Although one person was killed when they discovered a balloon in a tree and sadly it exploded. But that was the only fatality that I know of. But the idea of using the jet stream going from west to east was then aha moment for the US Air Force, because they wanted to do something very counterintuitive. It wasn't a spy mission, it was a provocation mission to provoke the Soviet Union in showing the Americans something about the Soviet Union. And that was where their radar coverage is. You know, the USSR is a big continent-sized landmass, you know, stretching from, at the time, from Berlin to the Pacific. it's a large area, and there was no way, it was assumed, that the Soviets had total radar coverage of the whole of that landmass. It was more likely that they had radar stations that covered maybe 200 miles in circles all over the place. And the Americans wanted to know where they were, because if you had a map of the Soviet Union with the radars on, you could figure out where to fly to avoid radar coverage. So how do you do that? Well, you provoke the Soviets to switch on the radars. And that's what Project Mogul was about. Project Mogul, forget the balloon. Project Mogul is the thing hanging underneath the balloon. Here's a picture of it. Notice these diamond-shaped triangular things. These are all called radar sondes, S-O-N-D-S. And what they do are incredibly good at reflecting and being visible to radar. You get them on ships to make ships more visible in fog to other ships. It's like a mirror that you're putting up saying, radar, look at me, the opposite of stealth. It's a radar sonde that reflects radar in all directions to make the object more visible. So that's what they wanted to do. On this string was a number of these sondes that would rotate and reflect any radar energy that the Soviets put on it, because also on that string was a recording device and transmitter that would show when the balloon entered a radar coverage, where the radar was, and when it exited it. And from that, they could draw a map of the whole Soviet Union showing where the radar sites are. And, they would have to repeat it because new sites might pop up. And they actually, in Mogul, had thousands of balloons, because also it was a very high attrition rate. An interesting story was that so many of these balloons that were really, really hard to launch because they only became taut and buoyant, fully buoyant at 60, 70, 80,000 feet. And when they were launched, they were just a floppy gas bag, and a lot of them crashed on takeoff into New Mexico and elsewhere. They all came with a piece of paper with the name and address of return to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Spanish. A lot of them crashed into the Iberian Peninsula and no doubt into Ireland and Scotland, and you could return them maybe for a reward. But very few of them did manage to float all the way, and this is so important, from New Mexico, on the jet stream, over the Atlantic, and then over Soviet Union. How long do you think that took? It's hard to know, but even at very high wind speeds, I imagine a bunch of days, maybe a week, maybe 10 days, maybe a month, but a long time. And underneath, on Project Mogul, they needed to have a device to transmit when the radar coverage was discovered in the Soviet Union. And for that, in 1947, they had normal 1940s electronics, no integrated circuits, no low energy stuff, just big transistors and vacuum tubes in a transmitter. And that needed a power supply. It needed a battery. And that opened a rabbit hole for me, because material was found at the Roswell crash site that is assumed to have come from an alien flying saucer. This is very, very strange material. Here's a picture of it. It's metal. It's mainly bismuth and magnesium with a bit of aluminium. And it was kept, supposedly, by an Air Force or Army officer who broke a bit off the flying saucer and put it in his pocket in 1947. It was then passed on through his family, and eventually went to Art Shaw, the radio host, and then to Linda Moulton Howe, who did a lot of research into what this material was. And it was obviously the skin of a flying saucer, this bizarre bismuth mercury manganese material. It's very strange stuff. Eventually, the material got paid for and bought just for Linda Moulton Howe's expenses that she'd paid in research for $35,000 I hear, by the Academy of the Stars people. Obviously, people like Hal Puthoff were associated with that, because they wanted to actually analyze what this material was, and they did. And the first thing that they discovered was it was an alloy, meaning it was elements, metallic elements that had been co-joined together. This bismuth and a magnesium and a bit of aluminium and a few other trace elements. And there was nothing they really knew what it was. It was definitely alien. It was definitely strange. There was no known application for this strange alloy. So alloys are where you put two metals together that join their properties. The metals stay separate. They're often only in close proximity to each other, but they share properties. And, obviously we had things like bronze, which, made copper a lot more tough. And so alloys have been around for many years. And this was a strange alloy with no known purpose. A sample has gone to Falcon Space, and what they have discovered, and you really have to listen to this carefully because this is a big clue, is that the isotopes of the bismuth and the manganese and the aluminium all are known isotopes of those metals from planet Earth. That means the metal came from planet Earth. That means the flying saucer came from Earth, if it was a flying saucer. And I think that's been very much ignored by people who are following this story. It's very important. They then kind of looked at the question, well, what was it? Who made it? And what was the application? And here's a clip from Gerard saying he doesn't know.
So here's what we still need. This is what I would suggest that anyone else that's really interested and wants to spend some time looking into this, here's what I would suggest. Can anybody find a special use case for this bismuth, magnesium, zinc? Can you find a paper that was written prior to 1947 that talks about these three things being used together? Because that would be really interesting.
I took that as an enormous challenge, and in my script I go into what it is, who made it, and everything. But I'm not going to tell you that today. I'm going to tell you about the basis of the story, and rather than have a trust me bro film, I'm just going to get experts on to actually tell you what I've been researching. And I'll just be the host of the show rather than me telling you my research, which I think is better for you as a viewer. So we're going to speak, hopefully, to Falcon Space. And I've also spoken already to two people. I've spoken to a radio engineer, because one of the things that this Project Mogul had was this onboard transmitter. And rather than recover the balloon and its payload when it, say, crashed into the Pacific or made its way all the way back to New Mexico, potentially, they transmitted the live data back to receiving stations. Now, from 80,000 feet, it would still only go 200 to 400 miles. So I have a real problem of when the balloon is over Siberia, what friendly nation is in 200 miles of the balloon or airplane or boat or anything. So I worry about that. When it was in Western Soviet Union, I could imagine receiving stations in Germany or or Britain would pick up the signal. Later on in its journey, I wonder what actually happened. But he can confirm the actual transmitter that they used. It was FM. It didn't use ionospheric bouncing. It might have propagated a bit further at night, but unlikely. FM is very much direct line of sight. So it was a transmitter that transmitted the data live, because they have now published all the project, so you can look at all the details. I know the transmitter type. So that raised a big question for me. Gerard doesn't know what the material actually was used for, who made it, what the application would be. And I realized I don't know how, for 10 days or a month, how they would power a 1947 high powered FM transmitter and all the sensors, including some cameras and microphones that they also had on board this project, and send that data back out as a transmitted signal using a battery. So in the project report, they talk about it, and this is the document. You can clearly see they say on short missions they used dry cell batteries procured in the United States from a company in New York. But for longer missions, they needed specialist batteries that were hard to procure, right? And I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking, I wonder where they got their batteries from. So I started digging this rabbit hole of specialized battery manufacturers. So very high up on this specialized battery list is this French company called SAFT. S, Society, A for accumulators, batteries, F for power, and T for traction. They were formed in 1918 in Paris, France, and they make very specialized batteries for balloons or bombs. In fact, they have a fantastic history. Did you know, and I'm just going to tell you this, that they produced special nickel cadmium batteries for the P-51 Mustang in World War II in France? Well, hang on a minute, but France was occupied by the Germans, so how did that happen? Every single P-51 nickel cadmium battery made by SAFT was hand smuggled out of France by resistance fighters to Britain to be fitted to P-51 Mustangs. And also those special batteries made by SAFT were used in the B-29. So there must have been a giant pipeline of secret batteries at the factory being made without the Germans knowing and being smuggled out of France to help the Allies beat the Germans in World War II. I'm so proud of SAFT and their network they must have established. But come 1947, they were the people to go to for a battery. And this battery for Project Mogul had some very specific requirements. It was for a balloon, so it needed to be light. It was at 80,000 feet, so it was at minus temperatures, so normal chemistry doesn't work. It needs to last for a month, and it needs to be high-powered. So that was, I believe, a commission to the SAFT company in Paris from the US Air Force to commission this type of battery. And they did. They supplied and suggested a nickel cadmium battery. But the US Air Force said it's still too heavy. We want something lighter. And SAFT have told me, and I'm waiting for documentary French evidence, ideally a commissioning order or an invoice, which I don't think they're going to send me because it's classified, that they decided that there is a lighter rechargeable battery type using bismuth and magnesium for anodes and cathodes. It has the same low temperature ability as nickel cadmium. It is high-powered, long-lasting, and lighter weight. And that's exactly the material that was found near Roswell, New Mexico. Layers of a French battery that was specially built for Project Mogul and the US Air Force in Paris. That's my story. It needs verification. So over the next few films, I'm going to prove it to you by speaking to battery experts, to avionics experts, to hopefully Falcon Space and others. Starting tomorrow, I'm interviewing a man who knows all about launching these spy balloons from Scotland. Again, Project Genetrex. I didn't know anything about it, but he does. So that's going to be the second part of this. So today, this was very much me not doing the script with a trust me bro kind of facts that I have researched for you. But this is an introduction, and I've decided not to just read out what I found, because I don't think you're going to like it. But I'm actually going to interview people and find all the documentation to try and clearly show that a French company called SAFT were commissioned to build a bismuth magnesium battery for Project Mogul that was discovered in the crash of materials near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. That's a rabbit hole. Join me on this journey. Leave hate mail to this address. Thanks for watching. Bye.